buildings?
Sir, the habitable space within those units are roughly the size of the conference room back there and are indeed quite small.
But they contribute to, does
Everything that we do,
does
sir,
the commons contribute more to climate change than a McMansion in Houston? You were pretty quick to criticize the people of...
That right there. That's a man who just got caught red-handed. A climate professor who wants to tell you how to live, where to live, and how big your house should be, but can't explain why his own university is sitting on $25 million in oil money and building massive new complexes across campus. Senator John Kennedy didn't just ask tough questions. He held up a mirror. And what it reflected was the kind of elite academic hypocrisy that millions of hardworking Americans are sick and tired of.
Professor Keenan, you teach at Tulane?
Yes, sir, I do. I have that privilege.
And you have your own website, KeenanClimate.com, is that right?
Yes, sir, I do.
Okay. And you describe yourself on your website as a globally recognized thought leader. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And you give paid speeches, do you?
On occasion, I do.
You have your own agent, I believe, according to your website, Lee Bureau.
This is correct.
And how much do you charge per speech?
It varies depending on the audience, the amount of preparation work that goes, and the amount of follow-through. Usually,
The last paid speech you gave, how much did you receive?
I'm happy to follow up on.
You don't remember?
I do not.
Do you give that money to Tulane?
I do not.
You keep it?
Yes, this is outside of my capacity as a professor.
Right.
As is
Now,
standard course.
you recently sent a letter you recently joined a lot of other academics. You signed a letter demanding that elite institutions and universities stop accepting money from fossil fuel companies. Is that correct?
This is correct.
You consider Tulane an elite university?
I would like to think that we have a high standard of excellence in our education and our research.
Okay. Well, the Murphy family of Murphy Oil and the Deming family of Murphy Oil have recently given Tulane $25 million. You think, have you called on Tulane to give that money back?
Well, it's not, they didn't give that money to my unit or the department or school that I work
Have you called on Tulane to give that money back, or you think that's okay for them to keep it?
It's their prerogative, not mine.
Okay. But yet you just signed a letter saying that all elite universities should refuse fossil fuel money. Did you put a footnote in there and say, except my own?
Well, what I'd like to say, Senator, is that I believe it raises a conflict of interest for those that research climate change that are supported by the fossil fuel industry.
But then why don't you ask Tulane to give the $25 million back?
Well, I think in the context, if that money were to be used to support climate research, information, disinformation, or whatever it may be, then that may be an appropriate conflict of interest. But I think in the context of which
you don't see the hypocrisy here?
It is a hypocrisy in those that may read and interpret it as such.
Maybe it's like Washington. If there weren't double standards, there wouldn't be standards at all. Let me ask you this. You also participated in another article here criticizing Houston for building new buildings and McMansions. And you said, I'm going to read your quote. I don't want to misquote you, Professor. That means we have to change our consumer preferences. You could have a super efficient, energy efficient mega mansion in Houston or the suburbs, but it's still a mansion. You're still over-consuming space. Did you say that?
Yes, sir. That's based on work as a member of the IPCC. Our research suggested that reducing our footprint in terms of total spatial footprint would have significant impacts in the decarbonization of the built environment.
And so you're saying that people should live in smaller houses because larger houses contribute to CO2 emissions?
100%, Senator.
Okay. Well, recently, Tulane finished the Commons. It was 77,000 square feet, $55 million. Recently, Tulane finished the Gold Ring Woldenberg Business Complex, $35 million to complete, 92,000 square feet. Boy, that's a McMansion. Mussafer Hall, 23,000 square feet. Paul Hall, 36,000 square feet. Richardson Hall, 50,000 square feet. Housing redevelopment phase 1, 230,000 square feet at Tulane. Have you called upon Tulane to stop these buildings?
Sir, the habitable space within those units are roughly the size of the conference room back there and are indeed quite small.
But they contribute to, does...
Everything that we do,
Does
sir,
the Commons contribute more to climate change than a McMansion in Houston? You were pretty quick to criticize the people of Houston for wanting to build, you thought, McMansions. But you don't criticize your own university?
I don't find that to be equivocal comparison between space meant for students who must reside at a university.
You don't see the hypocrisy in that?
It is your finding and interpretation, sir.
But you don't see the irony of the hypocrisy?
I'm going to go ahead and say no.
Okay. I kind of gathered that would be your answer.
All right, let's unpack what you just watched, because the mainstream press is going to either bury this clip or try to frame Kennedy as a bully picking on some harmless professor. But if you actually listen, if you pay attention to the words, the pauses, the stammering, you'll see a man who had no defense for his own contradictions, and a senator who came prepared with receipts. First, Kennedy establishes who this guy is, not some quiet researcher buried in a lab. This is a man who calls himself a globally recognized thought leader on his own website. He has a speaking agent. He gives paid speeches and keeps the money. There's nothing wrong with that. This is America. Make your money. But it matters, because this is not a humble academic being ambushed. This is a public figure who has chosen to lecture the rest of us on how we should live. Kennedy is simply asking, do you live by the same rules you're pushing on everyone else? And then the first hammer drops. Professor Keenan signed a public letter demanding that elite universities stop accepting money from fossil fuel companies. Bold stance, brave letter, except Tulane, his own university, just took $25 million from the Murphy oil family. $25 million. And when Kennedy asks if he's called on Tulane to give that money back, watch him squirm. It's not my unit. It's their prerogative. That's not a principled answer. That's a man looking for the nearest exit. You want every other school in the country to reject oil money, but your school gets a pass. That's not climate activism. That's selective outrage with a paycheck attached. Now, here's where it gets even better. Kennedy pulls up an article where Professor Keenan criticized people in Houston for building what he called McMansions. The professor said, and this is a direct quote from his own published work, that people need to change their consumer preferences and stop over-consuming space. In other words, your house is too big and it's hurting the planet. Got it. Duly noted, Professor. Now, let's talk about Tulane. Kennedy rattles off building after building. The Commons, 77,000 square feet, $55 million. The Goldring Woldenberg Business Complex, 92,000 square feet. Mussafer Hall, Paul Hall, Richardson Hall, a housing development phase at 230,000 square feet. That's not a campus expansion. That's a small city. And every single one of those buildings has a carbon footprint that would make a Houston McMansion look like a garden shed. And what does the professor say? He tries to argue that student housing doesn't count because the individual rooms are small. Think about that for a second. A 230,000 square foot building is fine because each room inside it is the size of a conference room. That's the argument. That's what a globally recognized thought leader came up with when confronted with his own hypocrisy. It doesn't matter what the rooms look like inside. The concrete was poured, the steel was forged, the HVAC systems run around the clock. The carbon was emitted. But apparently, carbon only counts when regular Americans in Houston are emitting it, not when a prestigious university is building a new business school. And then, the moment that should be studied in every communications class in America. Kennedy asks him point blank, "Do you see the hypocrisy?" And the professor, a man who has built his entire career on moral authority about climate change, looks into the camera and says no. No, he does not see it. Kennedy's response is perfect. "I kind of gathered that would be your answer." That's not just a punchline. That's an indictment. Because it tells you everything about a certain class of people in this country. They will lecture you about your truck, your thermostat, your backyard barbecue, and the size of your living room. But the second you point the spotlight at them, at their institutions, their funding, their buildings, suddenly the rules don't apply. This is the thing that drives everyday Americans absolutely crazy. It's not climate science that people have a problem with. It's the hypocrisy. It's being told to sacrifice by people who never sacrifice anything themselves. It's being told your house is too big by a man whose university just built a $55 million complex. It's being told fossil fuel money is immoral while your school cashes a $25 million check from an oil family. Americans can smell a double standard from a mile away. And Senator Kennedy just held this one up for the whole country to see. Here's the bottom line. If you want to advocate for climate policy, go right ahead. This is a free country. But the moment you start signing letters, publishing articles, and giving paid speeches telling the rest of us how to live, you better be ready to answer for how you live. Professor Keenan wasn't ready. He didn't have a single good answer. Not one. And to his credit, or maybe to his shame, he actually admitted the hypocrisy and then said he still doesn't see the problem. That tells you everything you need to know. Senator Kennedy didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need to grandstand. He just asked simple, direct questions and let the professor's own words and his own university's actions do all the heavy lifting. That's what real accountability looks like. No theatrics, just facts, and a man who had nowhere to hide. If this is the kind of no-nonsense breakdown you come here for, the full story, no spin, no corporate media filter, then subscribe and hit that bell. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Was Kennedy right to call out the hypocrisy, or does the professor have a point? I want to hear from you. See you in the next one.